Killzone Shadow Fall is not an amazing game. I've been leaning this channel more towards games I have undying love for, but Shadow Fall doesn't really fall into that category for me. So why am I talking about it? Well, Killzone Shadow Fall was a launch title for the PlayStation 4, and by most accounts, it was the premier launch title for the system. Exclusive launch games for new consoles exist largely to prove the value of the new hardware. New game consoles are expensive, and they tend to come out when the previous generation of hardware has hit its groove, so many people don't see the need for something new just yet. Launch games like Killzone are meant to show people that experiences that were completely impossible on the old hardware are now possible. Sometimes we get classics like Breath of the Wild or Mario 64, but more often than not, we get short, shallow games that don't really stand the test of time. I think Killzone Shadow Fall lands closer to the forgettable side, but I'm talking about it today because it absolutely kills it in terms of showing off the PS4's capabilities. Hell, I'm playing this on a PS4 Pro in 2019, 6 years and one hardware iteration after this game came out, and it still looks astounding to me today. The best way I can describe this game is to ask you to think about what you're used to seeing at E3 game reveals. You know, the ones that happen years before the game is released. These demos have tons of effects and little animation flourishes that make the game look more immersive than basically anything else out there. Then the game is released and the extra flourishes are typically removed in the interest of making a more consistent game. You know, maybe we don't need as many dust particles in those super dramatic light beams, or maybe the character doesn't need to bounce around so much because the game will be easier to play if they move a little more smoothly. Killzone Shadow Fall feels like you're playing an E3 demo from start to finish. It's full of overly aggressive animations and visual effects that likely would have been sanded down in other games, but not here. Killzone feels like an adventure in excess, and it's kind of awesome. Guns have elaborate and amazing reload animations. Environments are vast and often let you see way off into the distance to make the world feel absolutely enormous. Your character has very weighty movements and makes the game feel very grounded in reality. Character models have super high polygon counts, and the cinematics make sure that you notice them by putting the camera right up in their faces. And then lighting effects are turned all the way up to make sure the world looks incredibly dynamic at all times. Even things like load times and getting you into the game are kept to a minimum. It's a little thing, but I was super impressed about how quickly the game itself launches. Check out how long it takes for me to go from the PS4 home screen to the game's menu. When I compare this to every other game that comes out with these long title cards and half a dozen unskippable company logos that appear on game launch, this is super refreshing. Mark Cerny is out there talking about how fast games will load on the upcoming PlayStation 5, but Guerrilla Games did this on the PS4 6 years ago, and it's totally worth recognizing. But let's move past the visual flourishes and talk about the game itself. On the one hand, Killzone Shadow Fall has satisfying gunplay with a surprising amount of mission variety, all packed into a game that's a pretty good length. On the other hand, the controls are a little imprecise, the game feels a little bit old school, and the story is not very engaging. Basically, it feels to me like every good thing I can say about this game comes with a but attached to it. For example, I think the guns feel really good, and they all feel distinct, but the game doesn't effectively communicate how you are doing when you're shooting the enemy. Are you hitting them? Are they dead? The game doesn't really tell you super clearly either way. Also, each mission has a different gameplay loop, whether it's playing as a kid, sneaking through an enemy stronghold, navigating zero-gravity space stations, teaming up with a partner to snipe some enemies, or slowly picking off groups of soldiers from an open-ended jungle environment. But imprecise controls make some of these sections more challenging than they need to be. I think that you can boil all this down and legitimately say Killzone Shadow Fall is a mediocre game that is propped up by an impressive visual presentation. I completely get that position, but I think that Shadow Fall deserves more than that. It's absolutely a flawed game, but I think that like a summer blockbuster movie, the presentation could be worth the price of admission alone. Add on to that a game that I think has surprisingly good pacing, more mission variety than most contemporary shooters, and guns that feel all sorts of satisfying, and you get a package that I personally find to be a fun revisit every couple of years or so. It's not one of the greatest games of all time, nor is it even one of the best games on the PS4, but I think it's a fun enough game with enough moments that make you go whoa to warrant a playthrough. At the time of recording in 2019, Shadow Fall is settled down to about $19.99 and goes on sale relatively often. If you enjoy shooters and are looking for something fun with visuals you can drool over, and if you've made it this far in the video, you know if that's you, I think Killzone Shadow Fall is worth the cost of admission.